Since the early 2010s, we've seen countless console ideas launch and just as quickly fail through crowdfunding platforms like Indiegogo and Kickstarter. Early examples of consoles that succeeded in their campaigns but struggled in execution include the likes of the Ouya, PlayGame GameStick, and more recently the Atari VCS 800. Each of these systems debuted with a mix of understandable praise and criticism, appealing mostly to niche gamers and indie developers who hoped would either rejuvenate or revolutionize the gaming market. The Ouya entered the scene with a staggering $8.6 million in investment from backers, making it one of the most successful Kickstarter campaigns of its time. However, expectations were set so high that the final product could only meet them at a bare minimum. Similarly, the PlayJam GameStick, while far smaller in scale, still exceeded its funding goal by raising $650,000 against an initial $100,000 target, only to face similar challenges in delivering a polished final product. Today, launching a new console is harder than ever. It's not enough to have a great idea and a flashy crowdfunding video. Developers must account for manufacturing costs, software development, internal and external testing, and aggressive marketing, all before the initial launch in a make-or-break scenario. The Atari VCS, on the other hand, while often criticized as a marketing flop, is still alive and running after its 2021 release and just entered its 200th game milestone as of the making of this video. Whether you agree or not, its launch helped push Atari back into the public eye, reviving the brand's legacy and capitalizing on nostalgia in a way few companies today have attempted to match. And although I know that it's a very bold claim to say something like that, I have to stress that I don't see companies like Nintendo putting out hardware that can read cartridges, let alone support the homebrew scene like Atari does. But I digress. In the mid-2020s, we witnessed the emergence of even more interesting concepts from newcomers like the Playdate handheld and the Next Playground, each attempting in their own creative and unique ways to carve out a place in a highly competitive and rapidly evolving market. As previously mentioned, launching a product at this scale is incredibly difficult. Because of these challenges, we've seen many concepts come and go. Ideas such as the Napoleon 1, a Web3 cryptocurrency-focused console aimed at entering the NFT and crypto gaming markets, which never made it past the concept stage, and similarly, the Game Board 1, which promised to revolutionize the way people play D&D and traditional board games, but struggled to reach full realization. More recently, the Ink console, a handheld Kindle-like device that uses e-ink technology to display interactive books with gaming-style mechanics, flashed to actual cartridges, also failed to achieve an official release. Although many of these products never saw mass production, there have been rare cases where niche and obscured ideas did make it to market, and sometimes even into the hands of consumers and developers. Every once in a while, one of these unconventional projects manages to break through, proving that even in a highly competitive industry, dedication and innovation still finds a way to reach the surface. Just to name a few, products like the Intellivision Miko, while maybe not revolutionary and certainly surrounded by controversy, still managed to produce real physical units that made their way into the hands of some YouTubers. This proves that at least at some point the hardware existed in limited supply. Intellivision would be bought out by Atari shortly after their pivot to launch, and their operating system in the form of a smart TV app under the name Amico Home, where players use their smartphones as controllers. Another console that just barely scratched the surface but is quickly making a rise is the GameTank, a surprising entry in 2024. GameTank is an open-source 3D printed game console where you can develop games in 6502 assembly, the same basic language used for classic systems like the NES and the Atari 7800. It's a concept as incredible as it sounds, and one that deserves an entire video dedicated to itself in the future. And then, amid the wild foray of ambition, there exists a console so obscure and so under the radar that only 83 units were ever produced. A console that I personally had a close connection with during its launch. A console intended to bring the life back to the party. Some of you may have even seen a video I put out last year for the console, but in any case, this is the story of GameNite, a console that you never knew launched. The company behind GameNite, RecBox Incorporated, would conclude their Indiegogo campaign in September of 2023, which would yield just shy of $28,000 USD across 153 backers. Alpha shipments would almost immediately begin production with their partnership in Forum, who would utilize their old stock of N40 mini PCs as the main hardware for GameNite. GameNite had plans at one point to be open sourced so that users could flash the OS to any PC model that supported Linux. In simple terms, and to the less tech-savvy, the OS for GameNite for my unit uses GameNite UI, which is a launcher on top of Debian OS, similar to how Twister OS sits on top of Linux Mint. The device itself is limited in appearance and does not reflect the company's final shell design. Unfortunately, there is so much you can do on a small budget of $28,000 in regards to aesthetics. For me, I would not back the platform during the Indiegogo's active stage, but instead would hear about it in April of 2024 through a Facebook ad that the algorithm assumed catered to my needs. And for once, it was right, because in April of 2024, I answered that advertisement on April 6th, around 4 a.m. As someone who is constantly searching for the next niche product like a crazed madman, I had to inquire, and very quickly I found myself chatting with the company behind this mysterious product. My message was answered very quickly by a representative of the company, and eagerly so, might I add. I would poke and prod a few questions regarding the types of games that the company was looking for and if indie dev was their approach. After sharing some information about myself and what I had hoped to bring to the platform, we quickly agreed that a unit would be shipped to me, and I paid a small sum plus a shipment fee, and by the middle of May, my device arrived in my P.O. box. It is important to note that there were some internal delays, and Staff 1 and Weston of RecBox made no hesitation to communicate with me as a consumer to keep me up to date every step of the way. In fact, my relations with them would continue to be direct even to the company's end. During their marketing campaign, one image in particular was used on display to showcase how the GameNite worked, and on it would be an unknown game that would later be revealed as a simple concept design and nothing more. So I asked if I could use this concept and create a game for their platform, and that game would later become Elements of Love, an elemental card game based on the art concept of Maureen Josephine, aka Rainema, on Instagram. There are plans to continue and finish Elements of Love, but for a different platform. We at Crash Productions also had plans to port Ghost on the Run to GameNite because of the Unity support that GameNite offered. Unfortunately, a final product never made it to release. At the end of GameNite's life, I attempted several times to submit a test build, but there were new handlings behind the scenes. Although I do not know for sure, I was under the impression that a company or investor had been interested in buying GameNite, but due to NDAs, I was not privy to any special information regarding this. As such, I respected RecBox's wishes and chose not to push or inquire further. It is also important to note that I personally never signed any NDAs, and any information supplied to me was at the leisure and trust of the individuals who were eager to promote the product just as much as I was eager to develop for it, or to be a consumer of it. Out of respect to them, I won't express anything further regarding this. What I will tell you is that during the months of May through August of 2024, I had made attempts to spread the word to several developer friends of mine in the hopes of the product gaining some traction or interest in some form or capacity, as you can't sell a game console without games. One thing of interest is that, like the Atari VCS, GameNite was designed to ingest Godot and Unity games, and as such, Linux developers were the right path to follow. One cool thing that set GameNite from other platforms was that it used a built-in communication network from hardware to phone to communicate with the games. No data storage of any kind was required, so you didn't have to worry about pesky networks copying or storing your data. It was as simple as linking the GameNite to your Wi-Fi and then linking your phone to GameNite by scanning a QR code, and then boom, you're in. Latency for polished games was fantastic. Some other games clearly needed more time to be optimized and perfected, but we'll get to this in a moment. GameNite was intended to appeal to the party gaming crowd, but struggled to find its footing within what was already a niche within a niche. Most people who gather to play board games at home typically just pull out a physical board game. One of the major challenges GameNite faced was a lack of strong identity and recognizable intellectual properties, and without funding, these recognizable titles would be hard to come by. As ambitious as it was to focus on party gaming, the appeal to the home market was limited without licensed titles like Battleship, Candyland, Game of Life, Catan, Clue, and so on. The home market quickly proved to be a less than ideal strategy. About halfway through its 2024 life cycle, RecBox would quickly switch their focus to a more localized approach, offering GameNite units to bars and social venues instead. Hosting a GameNite event in a place where large groups of people naturally congregate and party simply just made sense. Footage from Seventh Kingdom, a venue in Los Angeles, California, showcased GameNite being enjoyed in what was considered its natural environment. Unfortunately, this success was short-lived, and although unrelated to GameNite itself, Seven Kingdoms would eventually close permanently, according to Google listings as of the making of this video. To be fair, the home market was never truly a primary goal. However, GameNite's initial presentation suggested that broader horizons were necessary. GameNite also appeared in other public settings, notably a pre-launch demo at Games of Berkeley, a game store in Berkeley, California, which remains open as of this writing. And promotional image also shows RecBox showcasing their concepts at a UCLA startup event. And there is video footage of a pre-launch demoing at a special event with 2-Bit Circus in Santa Monica, California. I personally had intentions and reservations to showcase GameNite at Fayetteville Comic-Con, an event in North Carolina, USA that I proudly worked for many years. Unfortunately, that demonstration never happened. If they could have reached more barcades and college campuses, maybe GameNite could have had a fighting chance. Unfortunately, the efforts were for naught, and soon the product was pulled after only 4 months to the online market. Ad begins in late March of 2024, and by mid-July of the same year, ads and orders were halted with the website going down in August of 2024. Several games were in the works for the platform, and it's a shame that many of them never saw release. Among the games that were in development, we have footage of the following. A game made in-house known as Potion Masters, BubBlock, Dominate, Hexagon, and Infection by eSolutions, which later became a collection for Atari VCS known as Taxagon, Texas Hold'em Poker by eSolutions, Bathtub Battleships by Keith Patience, Anti-Siri by Ruby XCOM, Ghost on the Run and Elements of Love by yours truly, Crass Productions, Redondo by Circular Logic, Warewolf by Nicky Nice Games, Haulin Oats by Gramps Games, and Don't Let It Die by Thunk Board Games. In its lifetime, only 9 games were actually released for the platform. In this video, we will go over all of them in detail, pointing out their mechanics and flaws, and more. Of the available games, we will start with Archers, which was developed by Luke Pfeiffer. In Archers, 2 to 40 players are required, allowing for maximum chaos and more. One of the coolest mechanics for Archers is that as you defeat your enemies, you will find quickly that there are more than just players to look out for. Barrels will sometimes release angry wolves and will devour the other players. As you advance, the winner has the chance to upgrade weapons and armor to make the player stronger.
Oh look, you can upgrade your shit! That's cool!
12 Orbits is a licensed game that RecBox contracted for GameNite, and I definitely have to say that when they chose this game, it was a solid pick through and through. 12 Orbits is an easy 5-minute game that you can simply pick up and play, and it supports 2 to 12 players. The goal is to capture other players' colored orbs as quickly as you can. The control pad scheme for 12 Orbits allows the player to have 2 colors at one time, with the goal to have 2 people use the same device, but it can be much more fun just controlling the 2 colors as a single player. The game mechanics are simple. The orbs follow a set path and can get caught in orbit around the playfield wherever a circle may lay. You can break orbit in an attempt to change the directory of your orb, but be careful. When not in orbit, it will be difficult to control or change the orb's path. In addition to this, the game has dozens of ways to play with several game modes, arenas, and customization options unlike anything in the limited GameNite library. Funny Clever True is a simplistic game that requires at least 3 players to play. The game prompts the players to vote on a series of fill-in-the-blank questions, allowing each player the opportunity to say some normal, or rather off-the-wall comments to complete the question. Then, players take turns voting on if someone was seen as funny, clever, or true. Each player has the option to be anonymous if they choose, and at the end of the game, the player with the most votes wins. My only gripe with this game is that it runs very slowly and it takes time to make it through the rather simple animations. This was a game developed in-house by RecBox Incorporated and was supposed to get a huge quality of life update, but that update was never seen. Furthermore, in version 1.6.3 of the GameNite OS, Funny Clever True doesn't show up in the storefront. When I asked about this, I was met with silence. It was, however, brought to my attention that games required a script that called to the control pad server and needed to be updated with the new server manually. Anything not updated posed potential bugs and resulted in latency issues or control pad input issues. However, if the game was already previously downloaded, then you could still load and play the games. One other thing that developers could do was sideload their test builds fairly easily, as shown here in this demo video by eSolutions. Speaking of eSolutions, the next game to talk about is Hexagon. Hexagon is a board game where the object is to mutate and take control of the board against your enemy. Once the board is filled, the player with the highest number wins. In particular, this game is great because it offers a 1-player mode and supports up to 4 players. It's also very well optimized and plays fantastically. For those of you who know me, I recently helped Farhad of eSolutions publish his games Ataxagon, Mayzam, and Video Poker Collection on the Atari VCS, and GameNite is exactly how we met. So thanks, GameNite. eSolutions also published Push the Box to the platform, and like Hexagon, is well optimized, with smooth inputs. Push the Box is another reskin of the classic Sukaban game, with close to 1,000 crazy mind-bending puzzles. He wanted to bring other one-player titles because at one point he posed the question, what happens after the party is over? And here we are. There's not much to say here because, well, the game is Sukaban. Another game brought to the platform was their launch title seen in some of the earlier promotions. This game is called Keywords, and like Archers and Funny Clever True, is exclusive to GameNite. This game served as promotional material for many of their venues and was one of the games that caught my eye at launch. Keywords is like Codenames, where a group of players split off into 2 teams, red or blue, and then you designate a leader and a guesser. As the leader, you set the game by selecting a specific word that will be displayed to the guesser on your team. This word is considered a hint. Together, the guessers will pick from the words available on the screen, and your goal as the leader is to convince them to pick the right word that correlates with your hint. Under the chess can be hearts to add to health, or bombs to damage you, or swords that deal damage to the other team. Once a team's heart meter reaches 0, it is game over. Keywords is by far one of my favorite games on GameNite. In fact, if I had to pick my top favorite 3 to play with friends, it would easily be 12 Orbits, Keywords, and GameNite Trivia. Or is it Trivia Party? It's GameNite Trivia, I don't care. In simple terms, Trivia Party, or GameNite Trivia, is a 1 to 4 player trivia board game. You move around the board and answer trivial questions. First player to go collect all the colors from all the corners of the board wins. Sounds simple enough, but let's look at it a little bit more in depth. GameNite Trivia is not only exclusive to the platform, it is perhaps one of the best games available on the platform. It's very clear that a lot of attention and thought went into this game. There are thousands of questions that the player will be asked, and it will push the boundaries of what you do and do not know. The game comes with 4 ways to play and supports up to 4 players. When I say that I haven't had so much fun with friends in a trivia game, I mean it. We spent a solid 2 hours just playing this game and trying to figure out the answers to some of these questions. When in play, the goal is to land on a colored space that has the stars swirling around. If you answer the question correctly, you earn a star. You have to collect 4 stars of respective colors in order to beat the game. It's fairly straightforward, and it's not a game that is intended to be beat quickly. You have to have a lot of time when playing GameNite Trivia. And now we take a look at both Tank Swap and Sumo Soccer. Remember when I mentioned control pad communication with the server update for version 1.6 was a little wonky, and how if things hadn't updated properly, all kinds of wonky things would happen? Well, here we are. To be honest, I'm not sure who developed Sumo Soccer, as it was just dropped suddenly on the platform and mentioned in the Discord without any announcement. I am under the impression that it was developed in-house by RecBox Incorporated, but I could be wrong. As for what the game is, well, it's soccer with bouncing physics. You can have anywhere from 2 to 12 players on a field at a time, but even with the CPU controlling more than one enemy, the game doesn't know what to do with itself. You're supposed to be able to slingshot yourself across the field with a simple drag and drop, and then launch yourself into the ball or into other players in the attempts to make a goal. But the controller does not communicate with the game at all beyond the setup menu. In most cases, the entire game controls itself and there is literally nothing you can do about it. The game is broken beyond playability. This is unfortunate because Sumo Soccer has such promise for a fun party game. As for Tank Swap was planned in the early stages and was somewhat promoted by the company for about a year, seeing as it sat on the website for some time. The developer behind the game, Variant Studios, was a very active member to the community and a pretty solid guy to chat with for what limited time I did chat with him. Tank Swap pays its homage to combat for the Atari 2600 and allows the player to customize and modify their tanks as they please. It's clear that there was a ton of ideas that were planned for this one, and it saddens me that the game is incomplete. It's realistically more of a tech demo than anything. It's also important to note that a lot of the games that were pushed to the system during the alpha stage were just pushed for internal testing from other developers, and a finished version was never released. Me and my friends tried to play the game and there was just no way to control anything. Latency and inputs just tanked the moment we tried. At one point I had asked about this issue, and to be fair, Variant alerted me that the game was unfinished and that version 2 was going to be pushed soon. That to get the best playability out of it, it had to be with 2 players only. At the end of the day, Tank Swap and Sumo Soccer were the last 2 games to release on GameNite, and their quality of life updates never saw an official release to the platform, leaving what remains a broken mess. Somewhere along the path of retail launch and the website's discontinuation, it was brought to my attention that the company behind GameNite had lost faith in the product due to underperforming numbers and excitement from developers, or lack thereof. That the company had to front personal funding to keep things afloat, that they were left with only a few options: sell out to an investor, fully open source the console, or abandon it altogether. At one point, I personally had even propositioned to a member of Atari the practicality of creating an app off of the UI to give GameNite a chance to procure a profit by selling through Atari VCS as a party game app. I even emailed a few YouTubers to help spread the word to see if anyone was interested in doing a review. The only one I heard back from was the immortal John Hancock, and the interest there was limited mostly because of his busy life. In the end, there was no interest, and the attempts to spitball a resolution to profit what had been built was ultimately a failed avenue. I would be lying if I said I didn't get a little attached to this device. For me, I saw something that had a ton of potential, and had it gotten the right exposure and backing, could have been something great. It came from a place of ambition, young startups from people fresh out of college, the fact that real hardware was produced on a small budget of less than $28K, and 2 years of hard work from this team went into something that not only beat all odds, but it even launched in an already demanding market. It yielded a handful of developers to produce exclusive software for, and it survived 2 game jams, an alpha launch, several demonstrations, and an official launch. In the final month of GameNite's life, I propositioned a game jam to help bring awareness to the console, and even offered up my own money with perks as a prize. I had a few conversations with RecBox and expressed that abandoning it seemed like such a waste after all that hard work. Eventually, planning began and the itch.io page was made. By September 26th of 2024, radio silence fell, and by October 6th of the same year, I received the official word from the CEO of RecBox that the company had officially ended, and the team behind this once ambitious platform ultimately dissolved. Their marketing remained locally confined to the state of California, and any plans to push demoing the unit to events in the East Coast on my end were cancelled. The first showing would have been in late October at Fable Comic-Con 2 weeks after its cancellation. GameNite was officially dead. GameNite counts as a piece of gaming history, and everybody mentioned in this video and everyone who was involved with the production of this device and this platform deserves to be remembered. And as such, although GameNite may be over, at the end of every sunset is a new horizon.